Welcome to One Cup on Tea. Patrick's Day is coming and I'm all excited. But I just want to share with you a little story and a poem and a little story and a little story more. Now, here's the thing. A few weeks back, I had to go and bring a car to the NCT centre for a friend of mine, and it subsequently failed. Not because I brought the car to the NCT, but because it had some mechanical fault. And the fault then was to be corrected, but the friend then asked me to bring it back for the retest. So on the eve of the retest, I was checking out to see that the repairs had been done. Anyway, we were having a little bit of an issue with one of the things that were on the list. So I brought it to the NCT to see what was going to happen. And the person who handed me back the cert goes and said it passed by the skin of its teeth, with a big grin on his face. Now, it wasn't till I actually looked at the percentages that I realised just what he meant. But more of that in a minute. That got me thinking about percentages. You see, it ended up that there is a story, a true story about a ship called the Flying Enterprise. And the Flying Enterprise got itself into trouble and it was leaning hard to port. And they went and sent out a SOS message and some ships responded, and then a tugboat arrived on the scene and the rope was got from the tugboat to the SS Enterprise. And the captain of the tugboat asked the captain of the SS Enterprise what was its chance, its percentage of being able to make the shore. And would it be even as much as 50-50? But the captain said, no, it's higher than that. It's 75-25. We can do this. But the interesting thing is that they didn't go to the nearest port. No, they tried to go and bring it back to the UK, which I find quite amusing. No lives were lost, bar one, unfortunately, that was happening in the changeover of the crew from the SS Enterprise to one of the ships that had answered the SOS call. But the ship was lost because they bypassed Cork Harbour, which was closer to them, to try and get it back to the UK. That got me thinking about a poem that I learnt when I was in first year called The Wreck of the Hesperus. And this poem is a very tragic tale. And I shall read you a little bit of it. It's the story of a ship called the Hesperus, and the captain didn't listen to the advice, but he brought his daughter with him on the ship. It was the schooner Hesperus that sailed the wintry sea, and the skipper had taken his little daughter to bear him company. Blue were her eyes as fairy flax, her cheeks like the dawn of the day, and her bosom white as the hawthorn buds that open the months of May. The skipper, he stood beside the helm, his pipe was in his mouth, and he watched how the veering flaw did blow, the smoke now west, now south. Then up and spake an old sailor, had sailed the Spanish main. I pray thee put into yonder port, for I fear a hurricane. Last night the moon had a golden ring, and tonight no moon we see. The skipper blew a whiff from his pipe, and a scornful laugh laughed he. Colder and louder blew the wind, a gale from the northeast. The snow fell hissing in the brine, and the billows frothed with yeast. Down came the storm and smote amain. The vessel in its strength, she shuddered and paused like a frightened steed, then leaped her cable's length. Come hither, my little daughter, and do not tremble so, for I can weather the roughest gale that e'er the wind did blow. And he wrapped her warm in his seaman's coat against the stinging blast. He cut a rope from a broken spar and bound her to the mast. O father, I hear the church bells ring. O say, what may it be? 'Tis a fog bell on a rock-bound coast, and he steered for the open sea. O father, I hear the sound of guns. O say, what may it be? Some ship in distress that cannot live in such an angry sea. O father, I see a gleaming light. O say, what may it be? But the father answered ne'er a word. A frozen corpse was he. Lashed to the helm, all stiff and stark, With his face turned to the skies, the lanterns gleamed from the gleaming snow on his fixed and glassy eyes. Then the maiden clasped her hand and prayed that saved she might be, and she thought of Christ who stilled the waves on the lake of Galilee. And fast through the midnight dark and drear, through the whistling sleet and snow, like a sheeted ghost the vessel swept toward the reef of Norman's woe. And ever the fitful gusts between, a sound came from the land. It was the sound of the trampling surf on the rocks and the hard sea sand. The breakers were right beneath her bows. She drifted, a dreary wreck, and a whooping billow swept the crew like icicles from her deck. She struck where the white and fleecy waves looked soft as the carded wool, but the cruel rocks, they gored her side like the horns of an angry bull. Her rattling shrouds all sheathed in ice, with the masts went by the board. Like a vessel of glass she stove and sank. Ho, ho, the breakers roared. At daybreak, on the bleak sea beach, a fisherman stood aghast to see the form of a maiden fair lashed close to a drifting mast. The salt sea had frozen on her breast, the salt tears in her eyes, and he saw her hair like the brown seaweed on the billows fall and rise. Such was the wreck of the Hesperus in the midnight and the snow. Christ save us all from a death like this on the reef of Norman's woe. All because the captain didn't listen to the message from the old sailor. And that got me thinking of another story, a story where Paul was on a ship, and that ship was in Fair Havens. It had pulled in. And Paul, in a dream, had been told that the ship was going to end up, that it would be destroyed, and it must remain where it was. And he told the crew this, but they wouldn't listen. And sure enough, that ship was destroyed too. But all the lives were saved because Christ did intervene. And that got me thinking yet again. And here's the thing. My friend was a bit of a chancer with the handbrake. Yes, he did go and repair it and fix it that it just passed by 1%. The person who was going and the SS Flying Enterprise was asked what was the chance. And he says there is a 75% chance. But he overcalculated and they didn't go to the nearest port and the ship was lost. The Hesperus, though it be a poem, was lost, and all its crew, the captain and his little girl, because the captain didn't listen. The captain, the crew, the soldiers that were on Paul's ship, all were saved because they eventually listened to what Paul had to go and say. And so they all landed on the Isle of Malta, and you can read that story in Acts in chapter 27. But that got me thinking. St. Patrick came to this island many, many years ago with the gospel of good news. And this is what he goes and says in Romans in chapter 10. It goes and says this: "For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. How then can they call on the one they have not believed in? And how can they believe in the one of whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how can they preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news." St. Patrick was someone who was sent with a message. Let me ask you, are you a chancer? Are you someone who's taken heed of the message? What is that message? That God, in his love, demonstrated, displayed, put on show his love for you in this, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Don't leave your salvation, your future, your security, your inheritance in God and that of those around you to chance. God has sent his messenger, and we have heard his message.